Welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. Today, I'm joined by Ricky Zellefrow. How are you doing today, Ricky?
Doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing great. You know, preseason, it seems like it's just around the corner now. I think a couple more days, and then we'll get to watch those games on YouTube and see some of these new signings in action for the first time. So I'm looking forward to it.
It's a very interesting time, especially when you live in Pennsylvania, and one day it's 60 degrees outside, and the next day it's 30 degrees outside and ready to snow.
Oh, yeah, it's the same thing down here in Maryland. I mean, we always joke about the weather is crazy down here, never knows what it wants to do, but, you know, Maryland and Pennsylvania being that close, you know, we get pretty much the same weather, I guess, depending on what part of Pennsylvania you live, but most fans, you know, they live on that 95 corridor, so we all get the same weather.
Yep, definitely. I mean, I live about an hour away from Philly, and it's just like sometimes I'm driving down to the games, and it's just like, well, this is what we're going to have tonight, and it's just raining, just pouring all over the place, and then sometimes it's like I leave for the game, and by the time I get there, it stops raining, and it's a great night.
Yeah, absolutely. I was happy, you know, this season, you know, we didn't get too many rainouts. I think only one game was postponed.
And like, what was it, 5 minutes before they were supposed to walk out, they suddenly decided they were going to postpone it. And then like an hour and a half later, they're like, oh, it's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, on a Sunday. And then, yeah, that was funny seeing half the stadium empty after there was a whole bunch of people lined up ready to go. And then they're like, oh, nope, like you said, the game's canceled. I'll come back tomorrow. Your tickets will work. And then half the stadium was empty, and it was a blistering Sunday because I think that game was at 4:00, like in the middle of the day. So that was.
I think Orlando had like a cup game during the week, and they had to play it then, or they wouldn't have been able to play it at all for a while.
Yep, that is what I remember, and so it's like, okay, well, and then that game sucked too because I think we went behind and then we tied it up or something like that. I mean, it was a game I think we got a tie, and it's a game we should have won, or maybe even we lost. I can't remember. It was not a beautiful game to watch at all. So I feel like, you know, just that whole rescheduling the game threw not only the fans off but the players off as well.
Yeah, I think if I remember, Orlando seems to be the team that we always play in that like back-to-back. We play in Orlando on a Wednesday and come back on a Saturday. And it's just like we went down and won in Orlando and then come back and we're like expecting like this great night. And then game gets canceled. Everybody has to wait a day. I ended up not going to that game on the Sunday because we were doing something else that Sunday and it was already like planned and everything. And I was like, I don't have enough time to get down to Philadelphia and come back because I was in Lancaster that day. And that's about an hour and a half drive. Now, I'm only driving like an hour from where I live, but an hour and a half and then back after a 2-hour game can sometimes be a little bit ridiculous if you've got something else going on, especially on short notice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was just a chaotic night for everybody. I remember reading stuff on social media. People were like, well, do I get my money back or all this? Like, I can't make the game. And I remember I called StubHub because at the time I didn't have season tickets and everything. And so I was like, are my tickets still going to be good? I mean, the team said it's good, but since I didn't buy my tickets from the team, I'm not sure if I'm good. But they were like, yeah, they're good and everything worked out. So, you know, in the end, I was happy just to take in the game, and I was happy I didn't have anything planned on that Sunday. But I want to move on to how you became a fan of the Philadelphia Union.
So I think the long story short on that one is I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour drive. And like growing up, I was a huge like soccer fan, I guess. And it started more in middle school. And I think it happened because I was about 12 years old when the 2006 World Cup happened. And I just remember like randomly flicking through the channels. I had played soccer growing up, but it wasn't like it was something I was deeply into or anything. And then I just turned on it must have been, it was the Trinidad versus England, or it was Trinidad versus England or something like that. And Trinidad like tied the game like 0-0 or 1-1. And I remember like, it was a few days later before that the US-Italy game happened. And I just remembered thinking, oh, like there's actually professional soccer players out there, which like as a kid growing up in like Lancaster, you don't think about that much because at the time, this is 14 years ago now. And it's just like the closest professional team to us would have been DC United. And it's like, you don't hear about DC United unless it's a Freddie Adu thing. And at that point, I think Freddie Adu it was either before Freddie Adu happened or it was like shortly after, and it wasn't that big of a deal yet. And then I slowly like got into like the FIFA World Cup games, right? And then I distinctly remember it was FIFA 07 that I first like started playing like career modes and getting into just FIFA in general. And that's how I ended up with my favorite English team, which nobody listening will have ever heard of. And then the union started in 2000, I guess 8 was when the Sons of Ben started and everything, something like that.
Yep.
And then it came in 2010, and I was tangentially following them just because it was really hard to watch union games. And it's not like my parents were going to pay to go to a professional game, especially soccer. My family wasn't that into soccer. So it was until about 2012 when I started really getting into watching like the U.S. games. There was a lot of ways to watch U.S. soccer games during qualifying at the time, most of them not exactly legal. So I watched a lot of those games, and then I started doing the same thing for the union. But at that point, they weren't that great. The first game I ever remember watching, like just on a TV at my house, was the Dynamo playoff game. That went well. And then every once in a while we'd get like an over the air, because it's an hour plus drive from Philly. You're not exactly getting the greatest over the air channels at the time from the Philly channels. It would be like 6 ABC or whatever. And then it would have been about 2013, 2014 that I actually started like actively following them. The first game that I ever went to was the 2015 Open Cup final, wearing my Andrew Wenger t-shirt, which that went well, obviously. And then the next season I had my 2016, I did a 5-game season tickets, and then I followed up 2017 through now. I've had full season tickets, and that's when I really started, getting more and more into it. Obviously, I've been to over 50 games now. I've been to 4 away games, I want to say. Something like that. I went up to the Yankee Stadium playoff game. I went down to Houston for the Open Cup final last year. Went to the last game in RFK Stadium. And I think a lot of it was like U.S. soccer was getting pretty big, especially around Jurgen Klinsmann and everything that happened there. And like as a kid, I was really like into like national teams, just like watching the Olympics, there's a national soccer team on. And then, I really like followed them and played all the video games. So it became a natural thing. And then the team came to Philly, and it just made sense, so, because growing up, my favorite team would have been like San Jose, just because the Earthquakes was a really cool name for like a 10-year-old kid. But when you've got a local team that it just starts, it's a lot easier to start following them than some team from across the country,
Yeah, absolutely. I do get that 100%. And like living in Maryland, I mean, people are like all the time to me, "Oh, why aren't you a DC United fan? Why? I mean, you live in Maryland." I'm like, look, when you calculate the DC traffic and everything, it is not worth going down to DC every week. It's an hour drive away from where I live in Maryland to Chester. I'm like, yeah, it might be a little bit more miles, but it's a lot easier of a drive than going down to DC. So, that's how Philly became my team. But I want to touch on what you said. You went down to Houston. How was that?
Well, it was interesting. Just with the season tickets, they gave us free tickets. I had planned on. So one of my big goals for the last few years has been I want to go because, the next qualifying when we play Mexico is probably going to be the last time we play in Mexico for a qualifier. So I had gotten a bunch of like credit on one of my credit cards, like just, free air miles. Right. And I was planning on going down to Mexico and saving that up for that, with the expansion of the World Cup. This is likely to be the last time we play down there. And I was like, I'm planning on that. And then it was like exactly like $150 just to fly down and have a hotel for a night. So I was like, you know what? They're going to pay for the ticket. I met somebody that's like a Philadelphia transplant down there for the game. And they gave us like $10 to spend for like food at the stadium. The union paid for this. And I was just like, you know what? I'll go down. It's only going to cost like $200. That'll be fun. And it was really fun. And, it was a little bit upsetting, especially because it's like, at least in the other 2 Open Cup finals, they were like really close games. And that game was just, Houston was built to beat a team that played the way we played, And it was just, it was not the greatest game to go to, but it was a fun experience. And like one of my plans besides like going to, a lot of games is to try to hit as many of the, other MLS stadiums that I can hit. So that's why I went down to RFK for the last game. That's why I've been up to Yankee Stadium. I've been to Red Bull for the U.S. Costa Rica game. Went to Columbus for the last U.S. Mexico game there. And it's just like, I'm trying to hit them. It doesn't matter if we're playing there or the U.S. is playing there. It's like a great opportunity to just, see a lot of stadiums, but see a lot of the country too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my goal for 2020 is to definitely go down to DC this year with the Sons of Ben and everything, and hopefully see another 5-1 victory. If not, a victory will do. And I'm debating whether or not to go down to Atlanta or Nashville. So, I mean, it sucks because Nashville, they don't have a soccer stadium yet. So you're going into a football stadium. So I'm like, but at the same time, too, if I can get a cheap plane ticket, a cheap hotel and everything, I might just make it work. Even though that game's on a Wednesday, I could definitely make that work with my work schedule. And then the Atlanta game, I mean, they're opening up that whole stadium. I think we're one of the 6 teams that they're doing that for this season. And I've seen a lot of people on Twitter that are saying, they're going down to Atlanta for that game and everything. So I feel like that might be a good experience to go down there, especially with the luck we had the first time we played them, where Aaronson nutmegged Guzan and everything. And we even played good in the playoffs, in my opinion.
Brad Guzan got nutmegged by a homegrown from the video that the Union did. That was a classic right there.
Yeah, it was. But what are some of your favorite moments from last season?
I think I tend to be the sort of person that's just like sitting there and like I sit in the Sons of Ben. So I tend to be the type of person that's just like a little bit more reserved when I'm watching games. And I kind of tend to get in that, we're down 1-0. I don't know how this is going to go, but I distinctly remember 2 times that we were down in games that like I just kind of stood there like I feel perfectly fine. And they were both of the games against the Red Bulls, funnily enough, where we're just down there and we were, when we went 2-0 down in the playoffs, I just kind of stood there and was like, for some reason, and it could just be the fact that we were down 2-0 to them in the regular season, I feel like we're gonna be fine in this game. And then we Bedoya scores that goal. And that was one of the weirdest ones because it's like Bedoya scores that goal and then like right before halftime, Red Bull make it 3-1. And it's just like, I still feel pretty okay about this because like we're definitely getting the better part of this attack. We're not being passed around. We're not being like dismantled by somebody. It's just they've capitalized on their opportunities in a way that we haven't. And then in the second half to come out and score those 2 goals and then Marco's goal to win the game, it was just very impressive. And I felt that way in the Red Bull game during the regular season where it's just like, we're down 2-0. But the thing I've always noticed about Red Bull when we play them, especially at home, and I think always of the regular season game where CJ Sapong scored the hat trick in the second half. And it was like all those goals were in the last 20 minutes. Every time we play Red Bull at home, they tend to break down. And it's not always an Ilsinho thing like it was in the last season, but like the year before, like CJ Sapong plays 70 minutes, batters them, and then scores a hat trick in like the last 20 minutes or whatever it was. And I just think every time we play Red Bulls, especially at home, there's always a moment near the end where we're just like, we finally click. And whether or not it's, just we finally capitalize on an open opportunity or, they just finally run out of gas, which sometimes they have, especially in Talon.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They have and everything. And we were fortunate enough last season to see 2 comeback victories against Red Bulls, one of them being the Ilsinho game, and then the other, I mean, everybody stepped up in that playoff game, I feel like. And they definitely had Andre Blake's back that night. But I want to go back to what you were talking about, going to national stadiums and going to see national teams play and everything. What do you make of Brenden, Aaronson, and Mark McKenzie getting called up to the winter camp? And then I think they got called up too earlier in the season, or later in the season, just to be a part of a camp. Do you think they're close to being called up to the regular national team and playing in a game?
So I think with both of them, it's a very interesting thing. And I think especially Mark was called up in January camp last year, and he didn't play in either of the friendlies. He wasn't even on the bench in either of the friendlies, which was really interesting because Auston Trusty also got called up at the time, and Auston was on the bench. And honestly, I think at the end of the second game last year, there was a sub left, and Greg never used it, and that really upsets me, especially like in a friendly like that where it's just like I'm trying to see, in January, like, can these MLS guys, can they compete on an international level? It might not be the best competition, but you might as well just throw guys out. And I remember distinctly there was a whole conversation between Greg and Mark why he didn't make the bench for those games last year. And I think originally it seemed like it wasn't going to go anywhere because Mark was on the bench to begin the year, and then what did Auston must have got a red card or got hurt. And then Mark was supposed to start a game, and that's when he had his appendix burst, right? Like the night before the game. And I remember distinctly like getting a message from one of my friends who I used to write with when I wrote with Section 215 that like, oh, his appendix burst, so Aurelien Collin's going to start in the next game. And it's just like Mark McKenzie makes so much sense for this national team because of the way he plays defense, the way he uses the ball. And I think it's very good to see him back in a camp because I think Greg could have done the thing where he saw him during one camp. He's not there yet. And then maybe he doesn't do good at the beginning of the season. He works back into the lineup. Whatever happened with Auston Trusty happened with Auston Trusty. So Mark's playing and he could have been like, well, I've seen him. I don't need to see him again. But the fact that he's calling him back is really positive. And I think with Brenden, the thing we've seen is he had a really good beginning of the season, kind of tailed off a little bit. And I think he had a really good end of the season. And then one of the most positive things we've heard about him is he went into that U23 camp and he impressed so much that he was called up by Greg to that last camp, right? He didn't obviously see the field or even see the 23 in either of those games. But the fact that he's being called into that position because you're impressing so much in a U23 camp, and then 3 months later you're being called up to the national team for the January camp, where you probably have a much better chance of seeing the field. And if you look at this lineup in general, it's a lot of U23 players. It's a lot of players that can play in that Olympic qualifier in March, where we have to face Mexico, Costa Rica, and the Dominican Republic. And I feel like this is a really good chance for both of those players to see the field. Now, is Greg going to do the sort of thing in this match where he throws out, a defense that is more veteran and maybe throws out kids in the midfield? I think it's more likely that Aaronson sees the field in these, but I think Mark McKenzie is like the prototypical center back that Greg really wants. He really, reminds me of the center backs that he plays, whether it be, Tim Ream, having the ability to pass the ball, play defense well, get the positioning right, or, John Brooks. John Brooks is really good at passing the ball. One of the things we don't get to see a lot of him just because we tend to play teams that are better than us is that John Brooks is really good at passing the ball. And just the way, qualifying went last time, we didn't get to see that a lot, and the way he was just hurt a lot. Now, I feel like I'm missing completely the center back that I wanted to compare Mark McKenzie to. It's like Aaron Long. Aaron Long is a really good defensive center back. Having a speedy guy like Aaron Long who can pass the ball, having a Mark McKenzie who we know is fast, who we've seen in the last 2 seasons do really well at such a young age. Could you imagine him in 5 years being a defensive staple on a national team? That would be really good, especially for the Union. And I think that's a really good sign that these two are getting called up for this camp.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Mark McKenzie, he has all the talent in the world. And I don't think it's no doubt that, he was a better center back compared to Auston Trusty and everything. Auston Trusty had his moments to cement that role with Jack. But, too many mistakes and everything. I'm not faulting Auston Trusty for his mistakes and everything because every center back is going to make mistakes, especially a young center back and everything. But, I can see Mark McKenzie, staying with the Union for another 2 years and everything, then going off to Europe and being a regular in the national team. Now, myself, my friend Drew Pels, he always jokes with me because I'm not a United States fan. I'm an England national team fan. And so, I'll watch the United States national team and everything, and I do care what's going on and everything, but whenever I watch international soccer, it's mostly towards the England national team and everything. But the one thing I do notice with the United States is they lack a creative player in the midfield. I know you have Tyler Adams, I know you have Weston McKennie and everything, and I know Christian Pulisic's drop deep and everything to try to be creative and everything. But I think, Brenden Aaronson, he's 18 and he can add some more muscle and everything. He could definitely become a regular here in the national team in a year, maybe even less. Depending on how well he plays in MLS this season, because it seems like Greg Berhalter always wants to choose MLS players for his squad and everything. And I see a lot of people, give him slack for that on social media and everything. And I'm not going to tell Greg how to run his team because, like I said, he's not controlling England and everything, so I'm not going to be vocal and everything. But I do feel for the United States fans that, feel like Greg Berhalter is not getting the best out of these American soccer players.
I think it's very interesting looking at the national team moving forward, because like Tyler Adams makes so much sense as a 6. He's going to run all over the place. And I think a lot of the people were thinking about the whole right back project, having him at a right back so he could see the field and Michael Bradley could still stay on the field. And then like, oh, Tyler Adams can't pass the way Michael Bradley can. But I think we've seen in, highlights here and there that Tyler Adams does have that passing range. It's just at Red Bull, he's not asked to pass like that. So having him back there and then having Weston McKennie in front of him, and a lot of people would like Christian Pulisic at the 10, but I honestly like Christian Pulisic out wide more than I like him on the inside. And I think there's going to be a big like battle for the 10 position, because if you put Pulisic on the wing, you have Jordan Morris, you have Paul Arriola on the other wing. Like, who do you throw in there as more of a 10? Because like, I guess we do the dual 10. So you have Weston McKennie as an 8-10, and then whoever else is an 8-10. You could have Sebastian Lletget, who I like really like as a player. Somebody like Brenden Aaronson could come in and steal minutes like that. If you're gonna play at a high level and then 2 years you're sold to some club in Germany or England and then continue to play at a high level, you can definitely go after that. Personally, I'm a big Dwayne Holmes fan. He plays for Derby County with Wayne Rooney now. And like, he got called up in the pre-camp for the Gold Cup, and then he was injured and he played in the 2 games before the camp. And honestly, he's the sort of like tenacious, like he's more of an 8 than a 10, but if we're going to play 2 8/10s, you might as well, go out with all the grit that you can go out with. If you're going to have Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and you throw in somebody like Dwayne Holmes, then you can really like, if you can control the midfield with 3 guys who are going to run all over the place, and then have wingers that are as capable as, Jordan Morris, Christian Pulisic, Paul Arriola as like a more defensive winger. And especially with, now having Serginho Dest, who is an incredible attacking right back, there's a lot of hope for moving forward. And if you have, center backs that can pass the ball to all of those players, there's a good opportunity for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of talented players in the U.S. system, it seems like, and everything. It's just a matter of developing those guys and, Greg Berhalter, I guess, selecting the right lineup and everything. And that's one thing a lot of people, it seems like, give him slack for, is not picking his best starting 11 or not calling up the right players, because you always see Will Trapp getting called up. And I know a lot of people hate seeing Will Trapp called up. But I want to move on, though. So I've been asking everybody, do you think Ilsinho is going to be back? And I'm going to ask you the same question there.
So I was listening to the podcast, right? And it's like at the time it's evolved from, who's going to be back of these guys? Who's going to be back from these guys? And now it's like, we just made the Jamiro signing, so it's down to Ilsinho. And it's like, they definitely said at some point that they made an offer to him, right?
They did, yeah.
So it's been 2 months since then, and we haven't heard a word about it. And I think the thing with Ilsinho is, I put him in the same category as like a Fred or a Fabinho, where they've moved here. They've really liked it. I think he's the sort that he's probably on more of like a coaching, trajectory. And we've got Fred in our academy. We've got Fabinho probably moving more towards an academy position. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear like, he's coming back, but don't expect him to do what he did. I don't really think of him as a player that's going to go a lot of other places, because like he really found his current, niche in the last season. And I think we could definitely use him. The problem I think with him is he's more of a winger, and moving forward, we've gotten rid of a lot of our wingers. Fafa, Picault's traded to Dallas. And Ilsinho is probably the most likely on the team to play wing position. And we saw in the first game of last year, where he definitely can't play on the side of a diamond, or you're gonna have a really injured Ilsinho by the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I've seen a lot of people say, he can play as a 10. No, not at all. And especially you cannot expect Ilsinho to start, because, he's up there at that age where he can't start anymore. And so, if Ilsinho is coming off the bench and everything, I'm happy with that. And that would be interesting to see Ilsinho become a coach. He's taking English lessons with Fabinho, I believe it is. So, maybe there is something there. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But you brought it up, the trade of Fafa Picault to FC Dallas for $375,000, and then Auston Trusty to Colorado for $750,000. What are your thoughts on these two moves?
Well, first off, I feel a little bit more upset about losing Fafa Picault because he, I think, embodies that Philadelphia fighting spirit. He's the sort of player that will never back down from a fight. And I'm not a huge fighting person, but honestly, I really look for that grit in a player. I'm the type of person that if I was a coach, I'd be like, oh, great, that person's fast, but is he going to stand up for himself? Is he going to, go into a tackle, and is he going to really fight for the ball? And honestly, he was the sort of player that embodied that. And he was so good at interacting with fans. He was my Facebook profile picture for a year from one of the Meet the Team events. And it was just really, really nice dude, interacts with people on social media. And honestly, it felt like a big loss, but it's an understandable loss because he doesn't really fit the system. And he probably wants to go out and start. He wants to play a lot more, and Dallas can do that. Dallas has a lineup that can do that. He's going to get a chance there because they have a lot of young kids. Lucy Gonzalez used to be their academy coach, and now he's their head coach. And it's basically he's going to play a lot of the kids, but he'll get a big chance to start in that team. And it's going to be really exciting seeing Paxton Pomykal, getting Fafa Picault that ball. And the good news is we get to play them in the first week, so we don't have to worry about, them clicking as a unit by the end of the season, especially because they have a lot of young guys between, Pomykal and Servania and Edwin Cerrillo. And, they made playoffs with a really young team this year. How are they going to do once they have a chance to gel? And now with an option like Fafa Picault, because honestly, looking at the team from last year, they don't have the, attacking players that they've had before. And, I'm going to blank on any names that I can think of, but Dallas is a perennial contender in the Western Conference. Maybe not the top, but they're definitely always competing. They're always making playoffs. They definitely get a lot of points each season. On the Auston Trusty side of things, I feel like there was definitely something up last season. You don't have that whole, you go from being a locked-in starter for a year and a half, and then suddenly you can't even make the bench, and Aurelien Collin is making the bench over you. And then you have tweets about when everybody finds out about this, which, I don't blame him as a young player. You want to play the game, you want to learn. You've went to a U20 World Cup. You've been called up to the national team. You should be starting for this team. But the other fact is Jack Elliott was one of the best center backs in MLS last year. Mark McKenzie didn't do anything to lose the job. And then, if you're not going into practice every day and putting in all the effort, you're not going to get the start. And I think Jim is definitely one of those coaches that likes to do things where, you got to put the effort in practice to, start. We saw this with Keegan Rosenberry. Keegan Rosenberry was one of my favorite players. He grew up near where I grew up, One of my friends who also has season tickets' biggest jokes is that they played each other in high school and my friend beat him so he could have played for the Union. But, Keegan didn't put the effort in, so he didn't start for half a season is basically how it's been, relayed to me. And then, he got back there in the next season, and now, Ernst Tanner didn't think he was that great of a player, which I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about the fact that, we traded away Keegan Rosenberry because we thought Mbaizo was, ready, and then Reddy Gaddis played the whole season.
Yeah, you're absolutely right with that. And I'm going to bring up something a little bit later and everything, because I do think the Union are in the market for a new right back, and I'll bring up the player that everybody keeps saying, oh, he's going to be our right back going forward. This is why we're more than likely going to sign him. But speaking of signings, I want to talk about the three players that we've signed so far, starting with the player that hasn't played for us yet. That is Jose Andres Martinez, El Brujo. The Union have paid a reported transfer fee of $325,000 to Zulaya FC. El Brujo has signed a 2-year deal with a 3rd-year option. He plays as a number 6, can also play as a right back. He'll be replacing Harris, it looks like, but I'm happy with this move. It's a 25-year-old Venezuelan soccer player who's so close to getting into the national team with Venezuela. And, I think MLS is going to be that next step to up his game and everything. So this is a player that's coming to the Union very, very motivated. But if you follow Joe Tanzi, Jonathan Tannenwald, or anybody that's linked with inside sources with the Union, Ernst Tanner went in a conference call yesterday with all those guys and just talked about the moves so far and everything. And I thought it was interesting that Ernst Tanner said that he sees Martinez more as a project on the long term. He's a good player without any question, he says. I was down there and saw where he was playing at the time. We are doing something totally different here. And in addition, he needs to learn the language and adapt to the lifestyle. It's quite demanding. And in terms of the roster, we should have at least 8 players for 4 midfield positions. So what are your thoughts on this deal?
I think it's especially interesting because, like, you're saying that a player that is 25, which we're throwing that out there, I'm 25, is still going to develop more. That's it's an interesting thing to note, especially when we look at players that have gone through a similar trajectory. Like, you look at Miguel Almiron, like, that this is a similar signing. I'm not going to say it's the same because Miguel is obviously a more attacking player, but I think it's interesting to see us go this route, with these players. Like, you look at, say, Sergio Santos from last year. He was expected to come in and be the starter, and that hasn't happened, but I feel like this year we're probably going to see a lot more of his impact. We saw it in that Atlanta game, which, if we're going back for a moment to the biggest moments of last season, that Atlanta game was very impressive. And I'm just looking at, Martinez as the sort of player where, like, we're trying to get on this Atlanta action. We're trying to get on this action that a lot of teams in the league are trying to do, which is go down to South America, find some younger players, bring them up and be like, here's your chance, get in the spotlight. We're getting a bigger and bigger, international audience. Let's throw these players out there. Let's, give them a chance. And then, like, I think with him specifically, if you're saying that he doesn't really know the language, he's going to have a lot of players on this team that he can talk to. Specifically all the Brazilian players will speak Portuguese, so he won't be able to talk to them. But a lot of these players are going to know Spanish. A lot of these players in the league know Spanish. So you're going to have a chance to learn and adapt. And I think if we're looking at him as a defensive midfielder and a right back, the thing that's very interesting, you're talking about this press conference yesterday, and there were 2 other notes from this press conference that I really latched onto, and it's the fact that we're looking at signing 2 or so other players, and then we're probably signing 2 academy players, right? And the thing I noticed most about this is is Slovakian player that we're looking at, and we've been linked to, and he went to an Eagles game, which if you're going to an Eagles game and you're a soccer player, that doesn't make any sense unless you're trying to sign with the union or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get to Matej Oravec a little bit. But what about Collin? The union have signed him to a 1-year contract extension.
So the interesting thing about Collin that I always hated him, as a fan of the union, you always hate those sorts of players that are like in your face. And then it's like the second he signs for your team, you're like, you know what? I've always liked you. I've always loved you. I believe he played for Sporting Kansas City when we lost to them in the Gold Cup, or not the Gold Cup, the Open Cup final. And, he's the sort of like, he'll rile up the opposing fans. And then he played for Red Bulls. And it's like, how do you play for the Red Bulls and then, redeem yourself? And then you come to Philadelphia and he's just the exact sort of person that you're like, you know what? He's an a-hole, but now he's our a-hole. And, honestly, if I was in charge, would I have re-signed him? No, but I get it because we're sending Auston Trusty away. He can play on the left. He can play on the right. He's the sort of like you throw him in the last 5 minutes of a game, just, shut it down completely, especially since we don't know who's going to start at D-mid. And if Craval's already in the game, we don't exactly have a D-mid to shut down the game all the time. And he would come in at center back, but you can throw in as many center backs onto the game as you want to. And I was just really thinking, like, I'm there with the signing. I'm not saying that I'm like really happy about it, but I get it. And if we're signing this other center back, right back, D-mid player, he probably won't see the bench a lot. And if he does, it's not like he's going to see the field a lot. And, he played really well in the 2 or 3 games that he got last season. It wasn't like he was, overrun in the defense. He's not the reason we let up one of the highest amounts of goals in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, letting in over 50 goals is definitely not a promising thing. And, you talked about, El Brujo needing players to adjust to the league. That's what Tanner was saying and everything. And Collin is one of those players that can speak Spanish and everything. So, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, well, if you bring Collin back as a mentor, then hire him as a coach. Don't pay him a salary as a player. But, I think he saw something to offer, especially with the U.S. Open Cup. I think the Union are going to take that serious this year. And Collin's going to be starting every Open Cup game and everything. But the newest player that we have signed, that is is Jamiro Monteiro. We know the Union have paid a club record transfer fee of $2 million. Jamiro has signed a 3-year deal with a 4th-year option. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's one of those signings where the longer it went without us hearing about anything, the more likely it was that we were going to sign him, because I felt like Jamiro was the sort of player where he was looking for something. He wanted to go back, but like he obviously liked it here. He obviously had a good time. He obviously played well. He didn't have the best last few seasons over with Mets and, when he came there. And it was just for him to have an opportunity. He's going to be the guy, and it might not, and it's not going to be as a 10, but he's going to be the guy. He was the guy last year. He was the motor of the team. And when he was out for a few weeks, we had a few issues. And it's just like him as a DP, I am perfectly fine with, because, a lot of people complained when, you bring in Ale Bedoya and you have like a glue guy as your big DP. But the fact is, you need a few glue guys. And like, what was it? The thing came out from MLS this week with the top 10 Americans currently playing in the MLS. And it was basically like Bedoya is one of the top, 5 or 6 American players, which, is a whole conversation, because I feel like he could still be playing for the national team, as an 8/10, as the 6 or something. He could be the sort of player that you're like calling up. You don't start him, but you call him up to be like, hey, he's the exact attitude we want in this team. He might not, play the balls I want him to play, but like, you look at somebody like Alejandro Bedoya and you're like, that's what I want in your team. And I feel like Jamiro does a lot of the things Bedoya does, just better, and he's younger, and he's got that motor that you want, especially in a team that is trying to counterattack, is trying to turn off defense into offense, is trying to do all these things. And, if we're losing Harris Medunjanin, we're losing a lot of players in the center midfield. We need somebody to be consistent. And if we have Jamiro on one side, Bedoya on the other, we have, one of these bevy of 6s that might not be there yet, but can definitely play and can definitely start. And then we have, say, Aaronson on top, or we have Fontana come in and push Jamiro or push Aaronson to the side of the diamond. And I feel like we have a great chance with, just continuing to build that midfield, because honestly, I'm the sort of person where I think our biggest weakness is just right back. I feel like we have a lot of good forwards. None of them is so far, besides, Shabilko last year scoring 15. None of them I think is going to go out there and score 20 goals. But I think if you have 4 or 5 good forwards that are scoring 10 goals each, that's perfectly fine, because you're getting a few from your midfield. Aaronson's going to go out and he's going to score 5 goals this year. Bedoya's going to go in and score like 3 or 4 goals. That's perfectly fine if you have 5 forwards that are scoring 10 goals, especially with the midfield that's setting them up. Now, we don't have Harris Medunjanin anymore, but the fact is, between the 3, 4, 5, 6 good midfielders we have, if we can get the ball to those forwards, they can score goals. And, I'm really happy with the Jamiro signing. He's the exact sort of player that I want on a team to, push the tempo, make defensive plays, be all over the place, but be smart about being all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely say, you're one of those fans that you stayed confident. Most fans, the longer this won with no news and everything, everybody was getting nervous. So, props to you for keeping faith in everything. You need the kind of faith in your team and everything, where I know a lot of people are being a lot more positive than they have and everything, but this is just one of those things where people were accepting that Jamiro is not coming back, and we're all happy to see him come back. But again, today, you listened to Joe Stanzi and Sean Brace on the Fox Philly Gambler show. Jim Curtin called in, and Jim Curtin said, I can say there will be some big pieces coming into the back and midfield as well. Now, I think this is interesting. He said in the back. Ernst Tanner said a center back. Now, I took that as there's a new right back coming in here, and I would love for a new right back coming in, and that could possibly be Matej Oravec, who can play as a center back, he can play as a D mid or right back, according to transfermarket.com. And, this is the guy you said was at the Eagles game. This is pretty much done. I feel like his club said on Twitter 4 days ago that He's not at the club anymore. He's talking to an MLS team. The first MLS team that he was linked with was the Philadelphia Union. So I feel like we're either, by the time this episode comes out, he's already going to be a Union player. If not, we'll see it a couple days after this episode. So I think this move's really, really close. What are your thoughts on this, though?
I think he's the sort of player that we're looking for in this team. Ernst is going out and looking for players that can play multiple positions. Because honestly, we've definitely been a side that's had, those like little nagging injuries over the year. Like we've had 3 or 4 good center backs the last few years, but Mark McKenzie's had his injuries. Jack Elliott's had his injuries. And, a player like Oravec can come in and, play right back. He can play center back and he can play center defensive midfield. And I believe, wasn't he like on the short list for like the Golden Boy a few years ago? He's like 20 years old. If we're going out and signing a player that's that old, and he probably has, big dreams of playing in England or something, he's going to be hungry when he comes here. I really think this is the sort of player that you like want to go out and get. And it reminds me a lot. And I hope this is not going to look like a reach, a year from now. He reminds me a lot of Kai Wagner in the way that you're going out and getting a player who's not playing in like the sexiest of leagues, but he's the sort of player that you need. And like if Martinez, you don't expect him to be the center defensive midfielder opening day, I feel it could be the center defensive midfielder or the right back or, maybe, and this is probably my craziest idea that I just came up with. What if we transition to more of like a 3-5-2 eventually?
Yeah, that would definitely be promising. I thought about that last year with Elliott, Trusty, and McKenzie. I thought we would definitely try that. And I thought Ernst Tanner said during the season that was a possibility. So I don't think you're too far off that. If not Tanner, I think Jim Curtin said that during the season. So that would definitely be very interesting. And maybe Oravec can be that center back with McKenzie and Elliott. But then again, Ernst Tanner said that he's signing a center back. So, I mean, who knows and everything? I mean, both of these guys saying that signings are coming, and a couple more signings, not one signing. Ernst Tanner basically alluded to 2 or 3 more signings. So I'm really excited about this. And I know a lot of people are like, okay, Jamiro is not our biggest player yet. We're going to get a bigger DP signing and everything. I don't think we will. But if we get players that, were young like this, playing in Europe and everything, that can play in multiple positions, I think that's great for the team.
I think the thing we have to do is we have to look at who's winning the league. Seattle Sounders won the league last year. Are any of their players, world beaters? Are any of do they have Carlos Vela? No, they've got Jordan Morris, and they've got a few guys from South America who are, big names for our league, but they're not exactly going out there and every night scoring a goal like Carlos Vela. LAFC lost in the playoffs last year. If we can just look to replicate what Seattle's doing, what teams like that are doing, what Atlanta's done, we can't exactly go out and spend $20 million on a player like Arthur Blank can just literally write a blank check. That's a terrible joke. Anyways, I feel like we can go out there and we can get quality younger players, and we can use their hunger, so to speak, to push our team forward. And if we've got players like Bedoya and Monteiro who are even Monteiro, he's a little bit older. He's had the experience of playing in Europe. He's pushing to play for his national team, Cape Verde. And it's just we've got those players. And if we go out and sign some younger players to pepper the lineup, and we give them opportunities, and, honestly, a lot of people loved when Ernie Stewart came here, but I think we've found in the last few years that, he might not have been doing as much as we thought he did. Honestly, the only 2 players that I can think of that were big Ernie signings that had a huge impact on us were Harrison Medunjanin and Ilsinho. And Ilsinho was more of it's been a slow burn more than he's doing a great job every game. And honestly, with Ernst, we've seen in one season a great bunch of signings. We've seen how impactful Kai Wagner has been. And Kai Wagner was just a random left back that we signed from the German 3rd division. And eventually, probably at the end of this season, he's going to go back to Germany and he's going to fetch us quite a bit of money, and I think Ernst is doing a great job of identifying the talent. And he's the sort of person, he comes in and he doesn't have the personal relationship with a lot of these players that he can just be like, you know what, Keegan Rosenberry, you're gone. You're not exactly the player I'm looking for. Auston Trusty, we've had some personal issues. You're gone. He's not sitting there and being like, these are the players we're going to play because they're from Philadelphia. If you're a Philadelphian and you come up through our academy, that's great. And if you work for us, that's great. But we're not going to, sit around and rest on what we have. We're going to go and find those young players. We're going to find a way for our team to be better. We're going to compete. We're not just going to be, the Philadelphia Union that existed from about 2012 to 2016. And we're just going to be there. We're going to be at the game, but we're not going to make playoffs. We're not going to win in playoffs. Ernst Tanner won our first playoff game in his first season. We gave him 2-3 years. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And that is something I didn't really think about, Ernst Tanner's first year there, first playoff win. So, what's to come next year? I hope even more, and I do believe even more. But I know something you were telling me off air and everything you want to bring up is the schedule. We know we open up the season Saturday, February 29th against FC Dallas. Then we go against LAFC March 8th on a Sunday. And then we come home for 2 games against San Jose on March 14th, and then DC United on a Sunday, March 22nd. So are you happy with the schedule, the way that things line up, or what are your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I'm very interested in the schedule. The thing I'll start off right away with is that, every year me and my friends go to this concert up in Jim Thorpe, and it's a St. Patrick's Day weekend concert every year. We've been doing this for a few years now, and I was really excited to go back again this year. And then they announced the schedule. And opening night at home is 3:14, and this concert is 3:14. And I'm just sitting there like, do I miss the band that I get to see one time a year? Or do I miss opening night? And, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've just been like, back and forth. Because, with the season tickets, I generally miss about one game a year just because I have a lot of car issues. But this year, I'm just kind of looking at it like, am I going to go to this concert that I only get to see this band one time a year? And then the other big thing is, I'm trying to hit all these, away stadiums eventually. And so in talking to a lot of the people that I'm friends with that, go to Union games, a lot of them are looking at that, 5:23 Colorado game. And then the schedule came out, and my immediate thought was, what's great? California in March. So this year, I'm going to California in March to watch the Philadelphia Union play at LAFC. And I'm really excited about that because that was a great game last year. And, Bank of California Stadium is a great place to go to. And I'm really happy that game's in March because, I get to go to the sun and, it's probably going to snow that weekend and I'm going to have a delayed flight back. But, I'm going to get to go to California for the first time. And you mentioned earlier in this about that Atlanta game on 6/20. And I was going to go last year. I was going to go to that Atlanta game before the season schedule was announced. And then they announced that it was in March, and it was right during my school year, and a lot of stuff was going on. And I was just like, crap, I can't go down to Atlanta. And I know a few people down in Atlanta, and I've met more through, John Zapata, El Parcero Philly. He's got a lot of friends down there. Right. And I met a few of them at the Atlanta game. And it was very much like, I'm going to go down, I'm going to meet some people, and I'm going to hang out. And then this schedule was announced, and everybody was like, let's go to Colorado. And I was like, I want to go to LA. And the other big one that jumps out to me is that New York City game where we get to play at Citi Field. We're not playing at Yankee Stadium, which is good because we don't do well in Yankee Stadium, and Citi Field's a little bit bigger. And I think I might end up making a day of that and go to New York, have a good time. I think this schedule really works out. There's not a lot of weekday games. We do get that LA weekday game against the Galaxy, which I've noticed that we tend to play the Galaxy on a Wednesday in April or May every other year when it's a home game. It is a little bit of, interesting to see which teams we're not going to play. We're not going to play the Houston Dynamo, which is a little upsetting because I'd really like to just beat the Houston Dynamo after last year. Then we don't get Minnesota United, which, we'll go back and forth on. And then the other team that we don't play is Seattle. And I feel like Seattle's one of those teams that I feel like, even though they're in the Western Conference, we've had a little bit of a rivalry with. I believe one of the first games at home was at Lincoln Financial Field against Seattle. It might have been the Lutu hat trick game, something like that. I honestly, I wasn't completely following, but it's one of those games that you watch the clips of. And I'm a little bit upset about that, especially since we played them in an Open Cup final. But I'm really excited to see how they go through the scheduling moving forward. It is a little bit upsetting that they decided that we're not going to play every team, but it's nice with everybody deciding that they wanted to go to Colorado because, Auston Trusty plays for Colorado. Keegan Rosenberry plays for Colorado. It's good that we get to have another chance to, beat them. Because I think, last year they came in and that was right after they traded for Jonathan Lewis and he scored the goal off the bench. And it was a little bit upsetting because we were rolling at that time. And then Colorado, like the weakest team, comes in town. Connor Casey has just taken over as coach for them. And then they managed to get that tie against us. And it's just like, come on, Connor, last time you came here, you got a red card for Columbus. Now you can't even give us 3 points. Man, that's upsetting. But I think the season overall works, to our advantage. There's a lot of good times to play some teams and, not a lot of weekday games. So we'll have a lot of rest. And I think that was one of the issues last year was we tended to continue to play people even after it was kind of maybe Alejandro Bedoya should get a rest, the game that he gets injured and then he misses the last 3 weeks. And then we go from the number 1 seed to, getting a home playoff game, but we're getting the, most even matchup against the Red Bulls. And we could have hosted that Atlanta game. We could have hosted we could have hosted the Eastern Conference final either way, but we could be, if we had played better with Alejandro Bedoya not being injured, we could be in the CONCACAF Champions League. I don't know about you, but I'm not fully excited about being in Leagues Cup, but I would be pretty excited about playing, Mexican teams in the CONCACAF Champions League, but the Leagues Cup just doesn't do it for me.
No, I agree with you at all. With the way things were looking last season, we had the opportunity to be in the biggest cup possible, but we collapsed there the last 4 games of the season, and it's just crazy too, looking at the playoffs and everything. I mean, New York City gets knocked out by Toronto. It does, disappoint me a little bit, but, at the end of the day, we had the best season in team history, and I don't see why we can't just build on that going forward. But why don't you let everybody know where they can find you on social media?
Well, you can find me on most social media sites. It's usually at Ricky Rondo. I went to basketball practice a lot as a kid, and I knew how to pass the ball. That was what I was good at. A white person that can pass and shoot the ball. That's about what I could do. So that's where I've had that name for the last 15 years. I think that's what it is on most sites. Ricky Rondo on Twitter. Ricky_Rondo on Instagram. That's probably the place I want you to most follow me because I like to go to Union games and post pictures of me at Union games. Also like to go to amusement parks and post pictures of me at amusement parks. That's one of the big things I'm excited for about LA. Go to Bank of California Stadium, go to Magic Mountain, and go to Knott's Berry Farm. So look for those. That's what I really do is soccer and roller coasters, honestly.
It's a pretty good combination right there. And of course, I'll link Ricky's social media accounts in the show notes and everything. But if you're not following us, the podcast on social media, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Free Kick Pod. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts by searching The Free Kick. If that doesn't work, then The Free Kick. And then type in my name, Todd Lewis. And then check out our brand new website, thefreekickpodcast.com. That's where you can learn a little bit about myself. You can learn about how the show got started. You can find all of our latest episodes and everything. And we have a lot of stuff planned, hopefully, for 2020. And I'm really looking forward to it. But thank you so much, Ricky, for being here today and talking all things Union and the United States men's national team.
No problem, man. It was a real pleasure to finally get back in those podcasting mics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you stop doing it and everything, you're like, okay, do I still remember how to do this? But then once you get going and everything, you're like, okay, yeah, I remember how to do this. And I remember when I took a little bit of a break, a month and a half break before I switched over to the new podcast, I was like, man, I'm really missing podcasts and everything. And now that I'm doing it, I'm doing 2 podcasts, sometimes 3 podcasts a week and everything. And yeah, I've enjoyed doing it and everything. And now I can check another person off my list. And like I said, just I had a blast talking with you and listening to your thoughts and everything. And I hope the listeners did as well.
Yeah, man, it's, the gift of gab never goes away, especially when you're an English major.
Hey, there you go. But with that said, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.